Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. So in a previous talk I said that the Buddha's teachings is guiding us towards a realization of the way things really are, but I didn't mention the way things really are. If we give a very, very succinct and very direct answer, the way things really are is anicca dukkha anatta, impermanent, unsatisfactory, not a permanent self. And just knowing that already is say we're already very advanced on the path, just to know that right direction, if you like. Otherwise, I mean, we know what the kind of truth is, the kind of fundamental truth is, even though we may, not live up to it, not recognize it all the time, but ideally we don't go too far wrong. I guess it's a bit like somebody who has they're going to travel somewhere and they have a very good idea what the map is, even they don't know every single detail, but at least they recognize the general direction they have to go in. And of course, it's just the nature of human delusion, human ignorance, that most of the time we aren't on the path. Only the Arahant is on the path 100%, 24/7, 100%. But once we know what the path is, then really the practice is just trying to develop that insight, develop that understanding in an ultimate manner, until we never forget it. We live with it all the time. It's part of our way of being then. Of course, this is always, why the Buddha reminds us and why he lays down the path of practice, because just by human nature or human ignorance, we are most of the time very far from the way things really are. If it was so simple, then we would all be enlightened beings. But until then, we still benefit from the Buddha's teachings. In fact, the ignorance, people who are still ignorant, we're still functioning in actually the opposite. We're still looking for permanence, still looking for happiness, still trying to satisfy the ego, the self, still addicted to it. So actually our conditioning, our ignorant conditioning, is exactly the opposite to the way things really are. So you can't blame us for being careless, I guess. There's no excuse. You know better. We know better. Almost like when you're a Buddhist and you know the real way things really are, then you got even less excuses. At least you can say, the other people can say, "Oh, ignorance is bliss." Yeah, painful bliss, but and then the way of practice. I mean, to be able to realize the way things really are, as we all know, it's it requires the development of the Eightfold Path. And basically, there's two ways in which people can realize the way things really are. Two basic methods, I think, two different ways, I guess you'd say. The first one, I would just say something like, kind of spontaneous revelation or something. Like some people have in the course of their life, they just have these moments of realization. They're usually it takes, unfortunately, a bit of a disaster or a bit of some real shock. Your life is just drifting along, and then something happens, and you realize, oh, what's that about? I remember I was just reflecting myself what, sort of the basis of how I became a Buddhist, if you like. And it was, I guess I'd say, it was sort of like a spontaneous realization of some kind. It wasn't very deep, but about nature of suffering. The whole ethos of Western civilization is based upon trying to find happiness. And if my WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant upbringing said, just work hard, save your money, you can buy happiness, live happily ever after. Well, it wasn't quite so simple as that. Especially if you weren't so good at making money. And even then, rich people still have a miserable life sometimes. You can, as somebody said, I think some meditation teacher said, yes, I know money can't buy happiness, but it sure reduces the suffering. In fact, maybe sometimes it reduces the suffering so much that you get even more complacent until the end, till your time comes to pass away, and then you got to give it all up. But for some people, and usually it does require, like I say, some kind of a bit of a shock, or a bit of some kind of a shake-up of our comfort zone. Some people it has to do with maybe their own health or something. Health, they reckon they have a health crisis, or they have a family crisis, or some kind of crisis. Then you recognize, oh, there's something wrong here. Like the way I've been living my life with this ignorant view is not working. Something's not working here. And so we have to find a way, find some kind of solution to it. So then people try to search for some solution to it. Recognize that no, it's not all just a bed of roses. So there's some limitations and difficulties in life. So then maybe they come across the Buddha's teachings and that's what I recognize myself. I was really suffering in a way. And then coming across the Buddha's teachings, it reminded me, the way things really are, there is unsatisfactoriness. I'm not abnormal. In fact, maybe I'm more normal than other people, because I recognize there is unsatisfactoriness. Everybody else was just kind of pulling the wool over their eyes, thinking they could live happily ever after. And then after that realization, recognize, suffering is sort of natural, normal suffer. It's just part of the human condition. And then I could see people differently. Those who weren't paying attention to the suffering of life, they were the ones who were, they're the ones who were ignorant or deluded. Before, I thought I was deluded because I wasn't happy. I'm missing out on the so-called American dream. This is the Western culture is supposed to be live happily ever after. Work hard, get lots of money, and live happily ever after. And it wasn't working. Maybe I wasn't working hard enough. What's the fault? Is there something wrong with me? And just around that time, it was what they would call the alternative culture scene. The so-called hippies, and they were very critical of the whole society. The whole of Western society was on a wrong foundation. So they offered an alternative culture, as it were. Wasn't very successful, actually, but cultural revolution. But but they had something else to say to it. There was some cracks in the edifice. It wasn't perfect. And actually, if people are able to look a little bit more carefully at their life, here we are trying to build some kind of permanence in our life, stability. But you look at it, and really behind it, not even being knowing what the Buddha is teaching, but just observing more carefully, you notice everything's changing. It is actually impermanent. Why are we always, having to fix things all the time, repair things and fix things, patch things up? Because they're always breaking down. And there's the whole business based around fixing things. Yeah? Fixing cars, fixing houses, everything. Why is that? Because having them permanent is not the way things is not the way things really are. Things are constantly impermanent, so you got to keep repairing it and fixing it up again. When you recognize that, it doesn't take, it just takes a little bit of reflective capacity, I guess, just to notice it. Sometimes, like I say, it comes in a big shock sometimes. When you're ready to go to work in the morning and your car doesn't start. Oh. You're in the 21st century and you can't build an eternal car. I think in some of the science fiction stories in the past, I mean, by this time we're flying around in spaceships, right? They've forecasted flying spaceships. Now we can't even fix it. Can't even make a car that doesn't break down. Got a little bit too optimistic about human nature, I guess, or something. Or they obviously didn't see the way things really are. They're just dreaming of something else. But for some people, they do have a spontaneous realization of some kind. But on the other hand, you can't really count on it. Say it just happens spontaneously. You can't make it. And if we just sit around and wait for that moment to come, maybe it doesn't come. It's we are, our nature is to try and ignore the way things really are, because our whole being is based upon the opposite. But if we are able to look a little more carefully, we see impermanence, for example. But our own eyes are looking for permanence all the time. Maybe if you wake up too quickly to impermanence, it's a real big shock. It's too much at once. You realize this floor is impermanent here, and I'm afraid to walk on it now. Might fall through. I was just reflecting on this story in the suttas about the Buddha gave the monks in the Buddha's time at a certain time he gave them this meditation theme of Asubha Kamatan, contemplation of the unattractiveness of the body. Then the Buddha goes off on retreat. When he comes back after a month or so of retreat, many monks have killed themselves. Bit of a shock, isn't it? I guess they weren't enlightened, obviously. The Buddha said, what happened? What happened to it? Well, they took the meditation subject very, very seriously, and it was just too shocking for them. When you contemplate, unsatisfactoriness, the unattractiveness of the body, sometimes it's just too much. You look at this body and it's always painful and always hungry and tired, and not all the time, but frequently. And it can become very, very, very depressing even. I guess depressing, that's why they kill themselves. Although they must have known that there's no solution either, because you got to come back and reborn again. But still, you got so shocked by this deep meditation that you couldn't stand it. Then the Buddha changed the meditation theme, the main meditation theme, to Anapanasati, mindfulness of breathing. It's not quite so dangerous and suicidal. And it's interesting that when the Buddha talks about the way things really are, the three characteristics, impermanence comes first, you see. Then unsatisfactoriness. And then the real shocker, no permanent self. So I think it takes a bit of a progression in development of insight. Impermanence is a little bit more safer, I think, for most people. Things are changing, but until you can bring it home to your own body, then it's a little bit more objective, as it were. But unsatisfactoriness is a feeling that you experience directly. Impermanence, you can look outside, and you can see it outside, but you can't see unsatisfactoriness outside. You feel it inside. It's a feeling. I don't know if that wall unsatisfactory. doesn't talk to me. I don't speak wall language, so I don't know. I don't think it has any feeling, personally, but maybe there are termites in it that have feeling, but not the wall itself. So unsatisfactoriness is very subjective, where impermanence can be somewhat objective. So at least gives you a start. When you notice that things are impermanent, then you see, oh, sometimes you get upset then. My favorite socks gone, my favorite hat gone. I'll never finish that one, will I? I haven't worn it out yet, have I? even my not so favorite socks, but I wore, but they wear out too. And then it can be, if I get too carried away with it, I can feel some suffering too about it. And then of course, no permanent self is very, very subjective. It's all about subjectivity. Like that, this wall is no permanent self either, but but to really contemplate that, you have to always bring it home to your own no permanent self. And there's yourself trying to contemplate no permanent self. But the second way, besides spontaneous realization, which is, comes, you can't really say when it comes or how it comes. For some people, it's just say accidental or a surprise or something. And then, of course, there's also a lot of people who can experience those things, but don't have the context for it. Like I was suffering at university, but I didn't have the context for it until I read about the Buddha's teachings. And then, what was before was, I guess I was sort of depressed actually. I was unhappy, somewhat depressed. Then when I come across this, oh, this is the way things really are. So it was kind of quite joyful in a way. Oh yeah, I'm happily depressed. Wisely depressed, maybe that's a better, wisely depressed. Now I know what it is. It's, and then there's a cause of it. The cause, I wanted things to be different than the way they were, the way they were. So craving and ignorance. So Buddha gives us particular tools to use to be able to develop ways to get out of that craving and suffering and ignorance, and then suffering as a byproduct. So once we recognize, I guess some degree have right view of what the way things really are is, and we understand that the way to develop those insights, develop in the Eightfold Path. And the second way to realize the way things really are is through active contemplation. As the Buddha mentions many times, he gives us these reflections. That, when you develop mindfulness, I was just reading recently about a book, and it mentioned about mindfulness. Somebody had some mental disturbances, and the therapist suggested they do some mindfulness practice. And it was the first one was, I forget what the first one was, first exercise. It was very, very superficial anyway. It was just trying to be more aware of sensation, basically. And I just was reflecting that, when the Buddha teaches about mindfulness, it's within the context of liberation. And being able to contemplate, not only being aware of the sensation, say bodily sensation, the sensation of breathing, but the Buddha, the second exercise, to be aware of the rising and passing of the breath. Rising and passing away, rising and passing away. And if, these people teaching so-called mindfulness, they just added that little exercise to it, how many people could have had a little breakthrough? A little breakthrough to, I don't know, Nibbana maybe, who knows? They got half of it right, to be more aware of the sensations in your body, for example. Most of them were with the sensation first. But then maybe it extends to feelings sometimes, maybe even states of mind. In this mention of it in the book, it was only about physical sensation, really. But But if they just added that extra exercise, now be aware of that sensation and how it arises and passes. Yeah, maybe some people they would have been just the extra little bit of encouragement, a little bit of direct wisdom, or a little bit of right inquiry that would have led them to a much deeper experience, rather than just being aware of sensation, but arising and passing of sensation. And maybe they would have had a real breakthrough, who knows. But the Buddha, many times, he mentions, as well as, like mindfulness exercises, just go in sort of a progression, even the Eightfold Path, first off with right view and then right morality, and then moving on to the meditation exercises, development of mindfulness. So it is pointing to a certain degree of, you can say, stability in one's psyche, that one can develop it from there. Because, as I mentioned, maybe sometimes, if you don't have a good foundation in your own being, then maybe being aware of impermanence or unsatisfactoriness can be too shocking, too surprising, too shocking for you. Yes, everything is unsatisfactory, but there still is some degree of collectedness and calm and clarity and insights and wisdom there. You always go back to your own right behavior, skillful behavior. Just something like developing concentration, for example, and being able to focus on the breathing for some period of time can give you a point of reference. You notice your mind, getting too excited, too much energy, back to the breath, back to the breath. And if you have the associations with the breathing as a point of reference, as calm, experience of calm, just as part of the cause and effect relationship of being able to focus attention for some period of time, then we have those associations. We get caught up in some of the the reactions to unsatisfactoriness. Back to the breathing, calm. The associations there are calm. And for most people, breathing is not too unsatisfactory. But if your main meditation theme was contemplating the unattractiveness of the body, then when your mind starts to get a bit confused or a bit agitated, go back to observing the ugly body. It's not so calming. It's not so reassuring, and not so stable maybe for you. So the Buddha was very careful, I think, with this, giving these stages of practice, the Eightfold Path, the development, if you like, of these qualities, the right understanding, first of all, right view, right action, right aspiration, and then the morality. And once we begin to develop, somebody mentioned that, for example, that just developing the 5 precepts, maintaining the 5 precepts, it does require a certain amount of character building. You have to be able to be a little bit more aware of, and also restrained, rather than just following your compulsions. I don't like that person, so I can just scream at them. Maybe you don't like them, but I know right speech. So I must rein in some of my compulsions. It requires some awareness, self-awareness of your compulsions, and then some ability to rein them in, or at least to dampen them, or at least to kind of cool them down a little bit, some degree anyway. It does provide a certain amount of inner strength, in other words. One does need some ability to control some of these compulsions. And with that, as somebody defined morality as how was it defined? Something like restraining the outgoing energies. But the people are very compulsive. Their energy is just are reactive. where now that energy can be tamed, can be brought under control, if you like, to some degree. Yeah, so that energy can be maintained within you. It can be used in a right way then, right action. Yeah. Whereas a lot of people now, there was that part of that counterculture movement was to be more open and more honest, whatever. At the same time, it just could lead to catharsis. People just letting it all hang out, and then the energy gets dissipated. It can be spread out too thin, can be dissipated too much, and of course, you can say in the longer term, who is doing that? It's letting yourself display itself. I have to be free and kind of express myself. Yeah, well, whose self are you expressing? The ignorant one or the wise one? We end up usually expressing our unwise one, our deluded one, most of the time. And then it just gets compounded and it gets reinforced then. Somebody becomes a chronic screamer or something, reinforces the screaming personality. It's much harder to see that that particular reinforced habit as impermanent. Seems to be this is the way I really am. I really am a screamer. My true nature. That realizing is just another conditioned experience, another conditioned response, that's all. So by developing these reflections, I think there's always there is the kind of formality of it, as the Buddha says, to reflect upon, the changing nature of the body, the feelings arising and passing away, the feelings, the states of mind. But some of them, they're so deeply ingrained as a habit, it's very hard to see them as impermanent. You can notice maybe your passing thoughts arising and passing away, but what about your certain personality traits? The things that you kind of value, you're going to really hold on to as being really fundamental to your being. Your views and opinions, for example. You pick these up from our conditioning maybe, and sometimes it's very hard to see them because they are kind of so internalized. It's hard to see that you have this particular view of things. It's reinforced in families and within friends. There is a particular phenomena in neuroscience. It's called something like the mirror neural syndrome or something other. That you mirror other people, especially people you admire. It was noticed some time ago that even in spiritual circles that many of the students of these teachers, they imitated the teacher. The teacher smoked, they all smoked. The teacher drank, they all drank. It is a neuroscience. It's part of the neurology, the brain, the way the brain functions. That this is how children learn. Children learn to imitate the adults, the parents. So sometimes you think you can be quite critical of your parents and say, oh, gee, they made so many mistakes. Then you find yourself acting just like them. Did you pick up many of these traits at a very, very young age? It gets just kind of absorbed into your psyche, and you don't have much reflection on them. And they say it's particularly, it happens particularly strongly in people you admire, people you like, people you want to imitate. So you imitate them. You find people dressing like their favorite star. Even there was what I see sometime a while ago. They had some kind of, was it a new Star Wars movie or something? There were people outside dressed as Darth Vader. There's 10 of them, There's only one Darth Vader. Why, you got 10 of you guys out. So they get their lightsabers and fight it off, fight it out. They were so, I don't know, so attracted to this story, I guess. You know, they even dressed like the person, you know, the movie stars. Even he's a villain, still dressed like him. So just part of how the brain works. You know, the brain mirrors certain behavior which one finds attractive or finds that one likes to find some affinity with or attractive or something. This is going on without us even knowing it. So you start to notice, maybe if you develop a bit more mind reactions, you can notice, you know, how you're just imitating these people. But it requires quite a bit of clarity. We will see that. At the same time, we're having to develop this method of inquiry, investigation, trying to see the way things really are. You know, sometimes it maybe is helpful to use the formalities of it. You know, to contemplate impermanence, make an effort to contemplate impermanence. In one of the Buddha's scriptures, the Buddha talks about developing concentration exercises, samadhi. And he said one of the exercises, once you develop concentration, and then when you are coming out of the concentration, you should reflect. This is a conditioned state. This is impermanent. You know, this is not an ultimate state. Because it's very easy, especially these more refined states of mind, to take them as, you know, as the ultimate. You know, the eternal consciousness. This is the true self, the true, you know, they have all these names for it. Maybe they even say it's God sometimes, some people. Some people, if they're able to develop meditation or concentration to an advanced degree, they see a bright light, the nimitta. Yeah. And maybe they think, oh, that's God. They say God was a bright light, you know. I just seen God. He's come to talk to me. Without realizing this is a conditioned state. Yeah. It's only there when your mind is concentrated, that's all. Yeah. It's not there all the time. There's a story of, I don't know where I heard it, somewhere in Thailand, where there was these two monks who were, this was a little bit of a, I don't know if you say, it's sort of like these political stories, I guess, maybe. But there was these two Ajahns, very famous Ajahns. I don't know who they were, but one was a so-called Samatha Ajahn. One was a Vipassana Ajahn, you see. And they also had their special way of teaching, and they both had great followings of disciples. And one day there was some kind of ceremony of some kind. They found each other sitting next to each other in the lineup. And so the Samatha Ajahn said, oh, you know, I think I must be enlightened, you know, because every time I sit down, there's a Buddha there. You know, he'd used his meditation theme was a Buddha image of a Buddha as his meditation theme. You see, he said, whenever I sit down, there's a Buddha there all the time. You know, must be enlightened then. And the Vipassana teacher said, well, I don't think so. He said, but next time when you sit there and the Buddha is there, just contemplate impermanence. The Buddha's arising, the Buddha's passing away. So the next time the Ajahn sat there, rather than just look at the Buddha all the time, focus on the Buddha, he began to reflect. It arises and passes away, arises and passes away. And sure enough, the Buddha passed away. And then he got enlightened, I think. He realized that the way things really are was impermanent, unsatisfactory, and not self. Whereas when he had the Buddha there all the time, he was the Buddha. The Buddha was permanent, and it was blissful, and it was him. He was the Buddha. And he contemplated impermanence and disappeared. And then he really saw the way things really are. So the Buddha obviously recognized the value of sustained right contemplation, as it were. First of all, I would say, first of all, to contemplate impermanence. That's a safer one. But sometimes we bring up contemplation on unsatisfactoriness. You have to be a little bit careful, of course, so you don't get depressed. And occasionally, you can also contemplate no permanent self. There's some little ways you can do that. You just observe the state of mind first thing when you wake up in the morning. Is it the same person? Same state of mind? Of course, you don't be careful. You don't proliferate too much about it, and say, "Oh, gee, I'm going crazy now." I'm different than the person I was yesterday, so I must be going crazy. Back to the breathing. Back to the breathing. It's the same, but not the same. And there is continuity, but it's not exactly the same. It's like this body. The body continues, but it's a different body every second. It's getting that much older, that much more worn out, but it seems to have the same appearance. Look in the mirror in the morning, and it seems to be about the same, but it's changing too. So if you look at the changing part of it, that's the way things really are. That increases the insight, the right insight then. Like looking in the mirror and, oops, you notice, you're getting a few wrinkles and, oh, I don't see that. Same as I was before. Just as beautiful as yesterday. Then you're increasing the ignorance and delusion then. This requires a little bit of, different approach, different way of seeing it. Between seeing the way things really are and being deluded, it's not a great big difference, really. We still have our eyes open, but in the end, it is a fundamental difference between the enlightened person and the ignorant person. And when you look at them from the outside, they can be exactly the same. What's the difference? But on the inside, quite a different perception, different understanding. So they can look on the world and really see through all the ignorance. Recognize, okay, there still is this relative picture, relative understanding. Depends who you talk to. But at the same time, the people who really are enlightened to the way things really are, they aren't fooled by that. Just appearances. So it's just this is conventional truth, not the ultimate. But those who only know the conventional and think it's the ultimate, they're the ones who are disappointed. They're always kind of in conflict with the way things really are. Double suffering. But when you can see it more clearly and the more we can live with it, the more that our understanding becomes in harmony with the way things really are. And we really are with the Dhamma then. As I say, we become, rather than self-centered, we become Dhamma-centered. Centered in the Dhamma. That's the way to the deathless. That's the way to cessation of suffering. Self-centeredness is going to be constantly frustrated and you're going to be constantly disappointed. But Dhamma-centered is the way through it. Simple change, but makes a big difference. So hopefully, once we understand what the way things really are is, then we can apply it to our life situation. And at the very least, is by knowing that we don't go too far wrong. Ajahn Chah was very helpful to remind us, people get carried away with things and he just says, my nah, uncertain. Right, I forgot that. Maybe we should have a screensaver. I think in one place they have a bell, mindfulness bell they call it, I think. And people go about their activities, daily activities, and ding, the bell rings up, right. There actually is a screensaver, I think. Every once in a while it just turns off. You get so absorbed in your screen, and suddenly it just goes on the screensaver, and I don't know what it is, a picture of a Buddha or something, and just for a few seconds, and then you, oh, right, collect yourself, and then back on again. But the old habits, this is our kind of default mechanism. Go back to the old habits. Permanence, happiness, self. So it's very, very easy unless we are vigilant and or have some degree of collectedness and clarity, vigilance, easy to just go back into it again. The Buddha gives that reminder, but we have to be able to develop that ability to know this and see this for ourselves. And otherwise, it's very easy just to slip back into the old habits. And then only wake up when we're suffering again. So at least we know the right path, the right way of practice, and so it's up to us to continue with it and develop it even deeper till it becomes our usual way of life then, not the way of ignorance. So hopefully we'll be able to continue this and see for ourselves.
Anmayam Dhammo Vadikatha Sadhikaram